Hey guys, so we are doing a deep dive on Amazon dispute timeliness. Really excited to cover this here today with Sean. If you wouldn't mind going to the next slide.
Not at all.
And so you have Sean Olson. So he is a retail insights manager here at Supply Pike. He focuses on Amazon and he has a wealth of knowledge on Amazon. Do you want to kind of talk about your experience, Sean? Where
Yeah,
you from before?
yeah, absolutely. So I've been around the bases, if you will, in the Amazon space. Started off at Amazon itself for a couple of years. I transitioned to the agency side where I worked for several years, building out essentially a service to help manage deductions for 1P vendors on Amazon. Transferred over to the software side of the business to try and add technology to the mix. A few years later, here I am. So again, I've got my background both from having worked on the other side at Amazon, serving vendors and suppliers, both on the agency side as well as in the software space.
Well, we are so excited to have you here today and tell us all about Amazon. I'm actually really excited to learn because I am not as familiar with Amazon. So this is going to be new content for me as well. And yeah, I'm Melody. For those of you who haven't met me, I'm the VP of Supplier Wiki here. So I'm going to be pitching all of your questions to Sean and kind of being the host for today. Awesome.
Perfect. Well, really looking forward to it. Thank you for having me today, Melody.
Yeah, thanks for coming. All right, are we ready to go to the next?
Let's
We'll
do it.
talk about our agenda for today. So we are going to be doing a quick overview of Amazon deductions for those of you who are not as familiar with it. And then we're going to be talking about retail deduction timelines and why it is so important to dispute in a timely manner at Amazon. Why are we doing a whole webinar on it? We're going to get into that. Then we'll also be talking about validity checks and disputing. And then at the end, we're going to be doing a quick Q&A with Sean and myself. So all of the questions that you guys have, I will be pitching Sean's way as you submit them, but then we will also reserve some time at the end. And then after all of this amazing hour of content, if you guys want to stick around, we will do a quick little sneak peek of our Amazon product so that you guys can see how Supply Pike can help you with your Amazon deduction. So please stay around for that because we'd love to show you what that looks like. All right, next we're going to go over our FAQ. So will you get a copy of this slide deck? Yes, you will. We will send it into the same email, same inbox that you registered for this webinar. You're going to receive it in 3 to 4 business days. We will send both the slide deck and the recording. So don't feel like you have to screenshot things. Don't feel like you have to write everything down. We will send both of them to you. What's the best way to ask the question? So as some of you guys have seen, there is a chat functionality, which is a single bubble. That's going to be the best way for you to actually engage with the entire group. But if you have a question, it's usually easier for us to see it if you submit it through the Q&A, which is the 2 little bubbles that says Q&A down at the bottom. That's just going to be a lot easier for me to manage and pitch Sean's way. Awesome. And now next, we're going to talk about Supply Pike. So for those of you who are not aware of who Supply Pike is different. We are a software company. We help CPGs, hopefully like yourself, reduce the revenue loss that you might be experiencing from your retailers. And we do that both through a prevention, detecting, automating the prevention aspect of it, so helping you get better. And then we also help you automate your dispute process, so going doing that recovery aspect. So we like to say we help suppliers get paid and get better. We do that all through software, and we have helped over 500 different CPGs. We've represented over $50 billion in retail impact, and we've served every product category. So these are some of the suppliers that we work with. One of the things that we like to say is, if you don't see your logo up here, we would love to talk, love to add you here one day. But that's who Supply Pike is. That's the only pitch that we'll give kind of during this hour's worth of content. But again, if you want to learn more about our software and how we could help you, we will be doing a quick little sneak peek down at the end of the webinar after we've gone through an hour's worth of content. All right, and now I'm going to hand it over to Sean to dive into some Amazon. Are you ready, Sean?
Yeah, let's do it, Melody. Thanks again. Okay. So I think first things first, we're just going to start with an overview of the different types of deductions on Amazon. Want to level set, lay a foundation for everyone so that we're all starting off on the same page. So the first place to start is, again, just differentiating ourselves between the two platforms that Amazon currently offers, between being vendor central, which is the first party seller. This is where Amazon's acting more as the traditional retailer in this sense, where purchasing inventory from vendors or suppliers, reselling on the platform directly to their consumers. This is an invite only platform. Conversely, we've got Seller Central, which is Amazon's third party platform where sellers can sign up. Anyone with products can sell on the platform, and it's something where these businesses are then selling essentially direct to consumers using that platform, Amazon's marketplace. So again, as far as content for today's webinar, where we're going to be focused, it's going to be on the vendor central side of these things. Okay. So as far as, again, breaking down some of the main focus areas for Amazon deductions, 5 key areas. It's going to be missing invoices, invoices that can't be processed. We've got potential shortages, then the remaining shortages, and then last but not least, defects, which will include supply chain invoicing and catalog defects. And before we move forward, I also just want to throw out a question for the chat, try and keep things a little bit engaging for the audience today. But for those of you in the chat out there, what type of deductions does your business receive most often between at least these 5 focus areas that we see today? Feel free to, again, put your answers in the chat and review that a little bit later, but we're just curious to get a pulse from the audience today, what we're most typically seeing with deductions on Amazon. Okay.
So we have had someone respond already. If you want to go back to the question.
Yeah. What do we got, Melody?
All right. So we have shortages, and then we have another submission that says shortages and price claims. You want to kind of talk about those?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think it makes a lot of sense that shortages and price claims are the most frequently occurring. I feel like typically what we see is on average, over 90%, I think, of invoices that are submitted to Amazon see some type of claim or deduction, primarily with shortages. So it's, again, not too unsurprising that that is one of the most frequently occurring ones that we see. Again, it's probably just primarily due to Amazon's receive process, which we'll dig into a little bit more detail, some of the nuances and specifics there.
Awesome. And then we do have a question. So maybe we can clarify this for them. But what is the difference in this vendor central versus seller central claims deductions?
Could you repeat that one again for me? I'm sorry, Melody.
Yeah. What is the difference in this vendor central versus seller central claims deductions?
Yeah. So I think it's a good question. So kind of backing things up a little bit, just the difference and the nuance between the two. I'd say that on Vendor Central, again, this is where Amazon is operating more as the traditional retailer, where it's an invite only. If you're a vendor or supplier, you'll be sending in your inventory directly to Amazon. If you're working with them in that capacity, there tends to be a pretty lengthy list of terms and agreements that you have to abide by as a vendor or supplier to Amazon. So I think that's where a lot of these deductions primarily come from, being infractions or something that doesn't quite align with Amazon's expectations in that receive process that causes a lot of these deductions. It's a little bit different on the Seller Central side. Again, if you're a seller on Seller Central, you're a lot more in control of managing that end-to-end shipping process, I believe. There's fewer nuances, I'd say, of deduction types that can happen. It's a lot more with inventory reconciliation, which, again, you could look at the end of the day as being something that's similar to a shortage, but I'd say just by and large, like how it works and functions at the end of the day is just a little bit different, even though it's a similar kind of end-to-end shipping and receiving process with Amazon. So not something that we focus on. Again, like our focus is going to be primarily on the 1P or the vendor side, but hopefully that helps to explain some of the differences between those two marketplaces on Amazon.
They did clarify that they're a seller central vendor, and we ship the inventory to them. We were seeing a lot of claims on things. We shipped the inventory to them, and they shipped to the customers, and then they said thank you. So
perfect. Yeah. Well, again, like something we could potentially cover if they're more of like a hybrid between the 1P and the 3P setup. But the focus again for today is primarily going to be on the 1P side, or focusing on vendor central. But happy to answer any additional questions if they come up.
Awesome. Thank you.
Of course. Okay. So just to dig back into some of these specific deduction types here, just going to unpack what missing invoices are. And I think the name itself probably pretty straightforward what it's insinuating here. But it's basically a situation where for Amazon to receive inventory correctly, they need to physically match that item in the warehouse with an invoice that's been submitted. So there is a matching process that happens. If there's not an invoice in the system, there's nothing for them to match it against. So therefore, they can't correctly pay you for it or receive it into their network. So think of this reason being more along the lines of it's missing, it was never sent, but it hadn't received due potentially to some sort of timing issues. It could also be that it was rejected due to a non-compliance, like there was incorrect information provided. But this is essentially, again, key process for Amazon in order to match the inventories. They need to have an invoice. So ensure that invoices are getting sent, have all the correct information, or there wasn't anything in the technical process that prevented that from being transmitted correctly. The next one is invoices that can't be processed. So this is a little bit different in that Amazon has received the invoice, so it was transmitted correctly. However, there's some errors or inconsistencies with the formatting that have caused it to be unable to be processed. So that could be something like incomplete tax rates, depending on the region that you're operating in, incomplete tax registration numbers. So you need to be officially registered and have all of your business documentation in line before Amazon can officially pay you for doing business with them. Other little things could just be silly things like incomplete or incorrect addresses on where that information is getting submitted to. Last but not least, our ever favorite EDI, also causing issues here potentially with how invoices are getting transmitted or the information that's inside them. So another one of these, shortages. This one is where quantity of an invoice does not match the quantity that Amazon claims they've received inside their fulfillment centers. Amazon also eloquently describes this as a PQV, or a purchase quantity variance. Number of reasons why this can happen, but again, this is one of the most commonly occurring types of deductions that we see in working with Amazon. And I would say from my perspective, primarily just part of the way that their receipt process works at the end of the day that causes this to be one of the most frequently occurring issues that comes up. So let's unpack shortages a little bit more. I think there's a lot of nuance to shortages when it comes to specific things like timing. So the way that Amazon views shortages is a little unique in that we've got a potential shortage and a remaining shortage. So the way that we look at this is kind of around the due date, and the due date being a key date on the timeline of when Amazon will technically deem something potential versus remaining. So as Amazon is arriving on the due date of your invoice, they're constantly looking for and trying to receive that inventory. If they've got some type of warning in their system that says, hey, we don't have all of the inventory, or we're not able to account for all of that inventory by the due date or around that due date, Amazon's going to claim a potential shortage. So at this point, there hasn't actually been any deduction on your invoice. So there hasn't really been any issue made, but this is, again, just an early signal that there is going to be an actual shortage down the road. So once we say due date is here, Amazon claims that they don't have all of the inventory that's listed on the invoice or that you claim to have sent as well, there's going to be now a remaining shortage. So this is the result of an unresolved potential shortage. This is where, again, inventory was not able to be correctly matched to that invoice. And as opposed to potential that is typically due to a timing element, remaining shortages tend to be due to shipping or some kind of supply chain defect that caused Amazon to not be able to correctly identify or receive that inventory into their network. So this is not by all means an exhaustive list, and it is pretty high level here as far as how to present shortage claims. But I would say high level, this is some great guidance and some great tips to help you understand how to prevent shortage claims, which would include thorough catalog setup of your items or your ASINs. And again, if we think about the scale of Amazon's business, there's lots of different items that are going into a fulfillment center at any given time. And if your items aren't correctly set up, not only just for Amazon to understand that this is, hey, this is widget ABC123, but if there's multiple widgets ABC123 going into that fulfillment center, how do they know that that one belongs to you versus someone else that's sent to them? So again, having unique external IDs and having a thorough catalog set up so that Amazon can correctly identify your inventory inside their fulfillment center versus someone else's is crucial and a key piece to having or preventing rather shortage claims. Another thing in here is just the ASN accuracy and timing. The ASN stands for the Advanced Shipment Notification. This is essentially the virtual format of the BOL and the pack lists, letting Amazon know when to expect the shipments and all of the specific contents. As far as Amazon's automated receive process and their efficient receive process, having an accurate and on-time ASN is a key piece for that efficient receive process to work correctly. So again, if your ASN is late, or if it's incorrect, or if there's an error in formatting, your inventory is going to get sidelined for a manual or a problem receive. And that is absolutely going to increase the likelihood of shortages and chargebacks. So again, ASN accuracy and timing is crucial. Not duplicating or sending an invoice too early. This one seems, at least the duplication of the invoice, probably pretty straightforward. At the end of the day, Amazon's playing a matching game with inventory. They're looking at the PO, they're looking at the ASN, and they're looking at your invoice. They're looking at the physical inventory that they've got inside their warehouse, and they're trying to match those things up as correctly as possible. So if we've got multiple invoices, or if you're sending an invoice too early, where the shipment's coming considerably later in time, they might be looking at some physical inventory, trying to match it to something, and simply applying it to the wrong invoice, for example. So having your invoice sent corresponding more closely with the shipment arrival time is key for Amazon to be receiving correctly against that invoice. Knowing Amazon's labeling standards is key. If we think about the label, it is another integral piece of Amazon's automated or efficient receive process. They're using those barcodes to tie back to their own inventory systems and their own internal management systems to know if they can receive something efficiently. So if there's any issues with labels, again, it's going to get your item sidelined to where manual receives going to happen, and therefore errors are going to happen in that receive process. So ensuring that you've got the correct labels is very, very important. Vendor lead time, this is another one. It's actually a metric that Amazon's using to track their preferred ordering algorithm. So if you've got two of the same items and one's got a shorter lead time, Amazon's going to prefer to order that because in theory, they can get it in stock faster than they can from another supplier. So reducing friction in that end-to-end process is going to reduce your lead time and also help to get prioritized or preferred over potentially some other suppliers that may be sending in that same inventory. Delivery compliance, all of these things have to do a little bit more of the timing of when shipments are arriving, but similar to other retailers, Amazon has must arrive by dates or specific windows in time when deliveries need to either be picked up or arrive at their fulfillment centers. So just ensuring that you are on top of communicating with Amazon if shipments are going to be late, for example, so that they know to expect them at the correct time. All of that's very important for how Amazon's receiving accurately as well. Last but not least on here, I think what we're trying to say with this piece is let's avoid the inbound receive process as far as the manual side of that. So again, removing a lot of the friction to where we don't need folks inside of Amazon's fulfillment centers manually receiving or going through problem receive, for example. We want to be trying to get as much stuff to go through the efficient receive or through the happy path in the fulfillment centers as possible. Okay, so we unpacked a lot of things that are super helpful for preventing shortages or avoiding these types of fines or deductions. So let's dig into a little bit more of these defects that could also be causing issues, kind of exacerbating issues with misreceives or shortages. So some of these things include items that have already been invoiced. So again, submitting duplicate invoices can cause issues with how Amazon receives, or at the very least, false positive shortages. Um, Late shipping, for example, again, it's better to ship late than to still invoice for something and never ship it at all. But again, trying to ensure that Amazon and when they're expecting to receive the items corresponds with the information on the shipment is crucial so that, again, they're not applying that inventory incorrectly to a different PO or a different invoice. This other one is invoice quantities that are greater than order quantities. This again is a red flag for what I would consider to be false positive shortages. So there needs to be a one-to-one match all the way through the PO confirmation, your ASN, and your invoice. So if there's any discrepancy in any of those along the way, it could cause what I would consider, again, like a virtual shortage where we feel like there's inventory missing, but based on the physical count, it actually is more of an invoicing error. Purchase price variance. So this is a little bit more around price claims. And I think someone mentioned earlier that price claims are something that they see often. So typically what we see is just a little bit of a miscommunication between upstream and downstream in the process and what price they're including between that PO confirmation and that invoice. But for trying to avoid price claims, it really is at the end of the day almost as simple as that. What you confirm on the PO is what you need to put on the invoice. And if there's any discrepancies in how you're submitting that price in between those two steps, that's going to be what's primarily causing that discrepancy. We do see sometimes Amazon causing errors on that end, but we'll talk about how to validate a little bit later in the presentation. So incorrect product receive, again, this goes back to correct item setup in your catalog. Make sure that Amazon can correctly and easily identify your items in the fulfillment center among the many other items that they've got in their fulfillment center at a given time. Item pack quantity and setup. This is, again, if you've got multiple layers, you're shipping in case pack quantities where you've got inners inside of a master pack, for example. How you've got that set up in the catalog, again, is really crucial that your inner pack master setup is correct. Because again, this is another thing that just multiple different layers and configurations can cause confusion with how Amazon receives. If you don't have that set up or configured correctly, they could over receive or under receive greatly. Multiple ASINs for a single product. Again, your items need to be unique. We don't want Amazon double counting, for example. Unrecognized product. It's another one. Again, item setup's crucial. So if you've got external UPCs or barcode identifiers that are visible on your packaging that doesn't align with how you've got your item set up in the catalog, it's going to cause problems. Overages not invoiced. This is another one. Seems pretty straightforward. I would say Amazon and how they receive. Sometimes they'll under receive or over receive on any given item. This could lend itself to opportunities for you to help recoup by actually billing for overages or where you've overshipped, but you still invoiced for the normal or confirmed quantity. Something that we can dig into a little bit more. Deleted appointments. Again, this just has to do with that shipping process and ensuring that you're communicating with Amazon if a shipment's been canceled, that you're also doing your due diligence to notify them, cancel any corresponding invoices that you may have submitted, etc. Products not listed on POs. This one seems silly, but again, with the multiple different variations that you can have in a product line, it could be understandable that sometimes something incorrect maybe goes out the door. Or again, this is something where there's just a mismatch in how the item's set up and you're communicating that to Amazon, where they simply believe that it's something different than what they've ordered. Last but not least on here is going to be a liquidated product. This is something else where, again, depending on the terms and conditions that you've made with Amazon, what they qualify as inventory that can be liquidated or kind of sold at a discount or in their warehouse deals. It's just something else to be aware of as far as your agreements and your own policies with Amazon when they're allowed to do that. Okay, it's a pretty exhaustive list here, but let's keep on moving on here and say that given all of what I've just explained and all of the nuances and all of the potential things and this sea of variables that could potentially be causing shortages, the best thing that you can do is just to be prepared. Be prepared for Amazon to take these shortages and these deductions for the variety of reasons that I've just mentioned. And our advice as far as being prepared is to just have your evidence on hand as far as your shipping evidence or your documentation. So a couple of key pieces that we'll recommend is to generate and store pack lists that match your ASN. Again, this is going to be a crucial piece for you to prove or demonstrate that you've got a one-to-one match between, your PO confirmation, your ASN, and your invoice. And then depending on your freight setup, this will differ slightly if you're collect versus prepaid, for example. But if you're collect freight, always require that your carriers sign BOLs and that you store these documents somehow, preferably digitally nowadays, especially. But again, as long as you're storing them somewhere, that is a great first step. And then if you're on the prepaid side for freight, collecting PODs ahead of time or being on top of and establishing a process to gather these PODs, because what we've noticed with a lot of these is that they don't store them indefinitely, and it's usually something like 6 months, 90 days, a year. And after that, that evidence is going to disappear. So it's just really important to continue to store these documents along the way because of issues like that. Okay, so not only just ensuring that you're storing or collecting the documentation, but specific to Amazon and what they require or things that they're looking for, they're pretty particular about their documentation, and it's got some key pieces of information in order for them, kind of in their own standard operating procedures at Amazon, to be able to process these internally as well. That's a key piece, is that they've got some guidelines internally that they need to follow. If they don't have these key pieces of information, they're unable to per their own guidelines. So it's crucial that we're kind of working as closely as possible with Amazon to ensure that they're actually able to process these as well. So some of that information would include things like your PO number, the ship to address, the item and shipment info. And what's critical about the item and shipment info is that it matches easily what's in Amazon's catalog, right? So if it's something that you've got an ASIN that you're ordering from, but on your pack list, it's a SKU, for example, it might not be very easy for Amazon to discern that that SKU means that ASIN. So again, how you're communicating to Amazon, just ensuring that that's streamlined, easy as possible for them to understand and work on their end, is just another key piece of what we'd recommend as far as pieces of data. The last thing that I'll mention on here that's just another a watch out, if you will, is that if you are collect freight, we would say try, if at all possible, to avoid shipper load and count as your method for shipping to Amazon. And we understand through all of this that retailers make mistakes in the receipt process, but with the way that SLC essentially operates at the end of the day, it makes it just really a challenge to fight invalid shortages. So just another watch out or another call out from our side, that if you are using SLC, there's a potential that it's going to make it more challenging for us to fight those shortages with the evidence that we've got available. Okay, so let's keep on keeping on. Talk about what do we actually need. Amazon has assessed a shortage claim. What do we need to do to actually dispute this deduction? So unfortunately, in the world of Amazon, suppliers are guilty until they're proven innocent, and they place the burden of proof back onto you in order to prove them wrong. So in general, you're going to need some basic information about the claim, whether that's the invoice number, the shipment information, and then ideally some sort of proof documentation to help justify why you're disputing that claim. So again, shipping documents. These are one of the things that in that initial dispute process with Amazon is arguably less important. However, I will state from my perspective that shipping documents still do become crucial, especially further down the road when we're going into potentially Amazon's settlement or their open statement process. So I don't want to skip over this entirely. And it is still a good thing to review just because, again, we recommend having a process to store these documents with the correct information so that if they are requested, we are still able to furnish them specifically. The type of documents requested are going to differ again based on your freight type. And if you're collect, we're going to be looking specifically for a signed bill of lading. If you're prepaid, we're going to be looking for a signed or a stamped proof of delivery, some sort of drop trailer stamp that, yes, it's arrived at this specific date and time. Those are going to be key pieces that we're recommending that you provide for shipping documentation. Okay, so as far as better understanding some of the defects that Amazon calls out, just wanted to highlight here that Amazon does have a dashboard specifically. It's under payments tab, and it's called the financial scorecard. This is just a way for you, again, as the vendor or supplier to Amazon, to better understand potentially what defects are driving some of the shortages or misreceives, and just a great starting place potentially to understand what do we need to do to actually fix this. So kickstarting a root cause analysis process, for example. This is just a good place or a handy place, and it's essentially where we're referencing some of that information, what Amazon's looking for as well. Okay, so we've gone through the gamut talking about deductions, I think setting the foundation, and then going really into the weeds on some of those as well. We're going to pivot a little bit, talking about the actual deduction timeliness now, really the meat of today's presentation. But across retailers, I know we're focused on Amazon today, but I'll say we manage at Supply Pike a number of different retailers. So Walmart, Target, Amazon, and Kroger fall within our wheelhouse currently. And as far as the pain points for disputing, they are similar. It just has a lot to do with the time consuming and tedium that it takes to pull all of the documents together, or potentially just having to log into multiple different portals to view and even understand what the problem is to begin with. So what these deduction timelines look like as far as the window suppliers actually have to file a dispute or contest a claim that any of these retailers make. Amazon's actually the shortest. And I will say that when we dig into the timeliness piece, some of it with chargebacks, for example, it's a little bit more strict and time bound as far as the time requirements. When we're referring to the dispute timeliness with Amazon in particular, the reason it's so short, we'll dig into the specifics of that later. But again, compared to some of these other retailers, the timeliness factor for Amazon is a lot more important, shall we say. So the approval timeline with Amazon, we're thinking about it conversely, tends to be one of the faster ones. So the timeliness or the turnaround time for Amazon to actually action or repay a dispute that's been submitted is considerably shorter. So we do see that time frame closer to about 35 days compared to others where we see that, for example, with Kroger, sometimes around 75 days. Okay, so now that we've kind of compared and contrasted a little bit with some of the other retailers, again, kind of focusing on the nuances in particular to Amazon, let's unpack that a little bit more and what that actually looks like with Amazon. So timeliness for Amazon. So I think to understand this concept, we kind of need to lay things out on a timeline here and understand a few of these key dates that are involved in the process. So one of the things that we're doing is calculating invoice age. You probably are as well. For an aging report, for example, we need to know if it's past due, how long past due is it, for example. So the time between the invoice date and the due date and the dispute date is essentially the invoice age. So again, that timeline, that series of events that are happening on that timeline. The invoice due date is essentially the time stated from the deduction. So when did Amazon actually claim, or was the starting point for that? So after 30 days after the due date is going to be this optimal window for us to be disputing these claims. So again, the due date is the starting point for us. Within 30 days after that, invoice due date is going to be what we consider the optimal window. Between 30 to 40 days after the due date is when we're getting into what we consider the maturing stage. So this is when it's getting a little bit older, potentially aging out of us having the most success from disputing. And here again, greater than 40 days, we're considering this mature. This isn't something that expires. You can technically still dispute it, but we see that there's diminishing returns much past this point, which we'll get into a little bit more next. So again, this is a great visual for those visual folks out there like myself to help better understand this dispute timeline with Amazon and some of those different dates that we're looking at. So again, we've got the invoice that's been received. Amazon is going to assess a potential shortage about 5 days before the due date. Once the invoice due date happens is when they're actually going to be creating a remaining shortage or a true shortage. And then from there, at that point, you'll be eligible to actually dispute it. And then again, takes on average about 35 days for Amazon to review the claim or the dispute and either approve or deny it. The other interesting thing that I don't want to ignore on the page here is that smart matching is something that's going to be constantly running in the background, and Amazon claims that it runs 35 to 40 days after that invoice due date. So kind of right within that sweet spot that we're recommending for optimal dispute timing. So to unpack like why we found this or why we're making these assertions here is that our Amazon team conducted a really in-depth analysis to try and understand, what are some of the patterns and trends that we're seeing across all of the disputes that have been filed through our application. And our findings were that the vast majority, so basically 99% of those disputes that were approved or partially approved were actually disputed within that 40 days of that due date for an invoice. So again, our timing or our findings by and large is that timing plays a strong factor, and that most of the success that we've seen is within that 40 days post invoice due date. So in general, so kind of the general trend in unpacking this is that on average or in general, the earlier that a vendor or supplier disputes, the better win rates that they have generally. So diminishing returns over time. So again, timeliness is what we found is a major factor in dispute success with that initial dispute on Amazon. So again, nearly all of suppliers' dispute success with invalid shortage deduction is going to come down to hitting within that optimal time period. And that even though there is likelihood or some potential of disputes being approved, anything outside of that time period are really going to have diminishing returns. So again, if it's timely, it's got the correct information, it's very unlikely that Amazon is going to reject it. So again, like for the visual folks out there, I think the slide's super helpful at understanding a little bit more clearly what we're talking about with dispute timeliness. So in green, we've got the invoice due date. That's essentially the starting point for us. We've found with our studies that in that 30 days after the invoice due date is where most successful disputes happen. Within 10 days, so within that 40 days, we're seeing, again, some diminishing returns here, but still higher success rates than we found outside of that 40-day window entirely. So again, when we're looking at this, when we see disputes that are filed that are greater than that 40 days, this is what we consider untimely. This falls in our mature bucket as far as disputes and the timing goes. And again, this is what we're seeing, that disputes filed in this time period, very rarely successful, even if they've got all of the correct information, even if additional documentation is included with those, still higher likelihood of those being rejected. Okay, so one of the things here, again, what we're claiming is that there's a key difference between your overall dispute win rate and your timely or your optimal dispute win rate. And that suppliers that are able to better measure their success at winning back disputes within this period of time are able to, again, have higher success rates. So consistency in the timing and the information that's provided is going to, again, yield higher success. So as far as showing some receipts or doing a little homework from our report, this is just a tale of two accounts. So this is our A/B test that we wanted to highlight based on a sample set from our analysis where comparing these two suppliers and looking at their overall success rates, again, supplier number one, their overall dispute success win rate was just about 17% compared to supplier number two, which was closer to 83 or 84%. We're looking at the breakdown between when these suppliers submitted these disputes. We'll see that supplier number one, despite submitting less than 1% of their disputes within that optimal time period, yielded close to 90% success rate on those less than 1% of disputes. Whereas those disputes that were in the mature time period, again, basically zero. Whereas supplier number two, they've got a total win rate, again, over 83%. When we're looking at the breakdown of the disputes that they filed within that optimal time period, vast majority, close to 99% of their disputes were filed within that time period. And again, their win rate for any of those mature disputes was basically zero. So again, this is just a thing where if we find you switch up your timing, the amount of time that you're spending in this process is going to be used much more efficiently. So again, it seems like based on the effort and output of supplier number one that they're just not having any success. But really, if they just changed up their timing a little bit, they would look a lot more like supplier two, who's getting a lot more return on their time and investment in filing these disputes within that optimal time period. Okay, so we're going to switch gears just a little bit here, but we're going to talk about validity checks and disputing. I think we understand at the end of the day, Amazon's making a claim, and one of the key things or one of the first things that we need to understand is, who done it? Like, who's wrong in this? Amazon's made a claim. It's either something that we've done incorrectly that we need to fix, or it's something that Amazon's done incorrectly in the process and we need to prove them wrong. So, the short disputing window, again, with the optimal timing means that validating becomes more urgent from a timing perspective for you to be doing in your business. So it's something, if you want to feel more confident going back after Amazon for something that you've not done incorrectly, then you need to be able to make that determination pretty quickly, especially as volumes scale with the amount of invoices or deductions that are happening. So again, I'll just say that deduction teams need to be quick in doing their validity assessments, and that's something that I'll walk through a little bit later when we go through the demonstration on our application. But we're kind of rounding out here, so let's talk about how to avoid Amazon deductions. So once and for all, just really digging into this in some more detail. All of the things that we've talked about and unpacked earlier, when we're really putting them up in the bigger picture perspective, we can see that there's a lot of overlap. There's a lot of crossover in what's happening internally with all of these processes happening. So invoices that can't be processed, missing invoices, any of these defects that lead to both potential and remaining shortages. There's a lot of crossover again in what could be potentially driving these on the other side. So again, more recommendations, kind of as we wrap things up here, some key things to remember about avoiding Amazon fines. And that's, again, ensuring accuracy in your catalog setup. Help Amazon be able to quickly and easily identify and discern your items from everyone else's in their fulfillment centers. Invoice data. This is another one of those key things I've mentioned now, where you've got to have a one-to-one match between your PO, your ASN, and your invoice. So again, ensure consistency and cleanliness in your data through your end-to-end process. Cancel invoices with enough time. This is, again, if your shipment doesn't go out the door, but you still submit an invoice, you've got potential that Amazon's going to mismatch inventory from another PO to that invoice. So do your due diligence in your invoicing process to where you're closing the loop or you're canceling out invoices that don't have a corresponding shipment with them. So our recommendation as far as when you submit your invoices and the timing, ideally 1 to 4 days between your delivery date. Again, can cause issues if you're submitting them too early, or if Amazon's got excess inventory sitting around, they may accidentally apply it incorrectly to that invoice that you've submitted for a shipment that hasn't gone out the door yet. One label on your master pack, on your carton, no exterior UPCs visible, because the way Amazon scans through their parcel identifier tunnel, they could accidentally scan the UPC, check in one item instead of a case pack of 12, for example. It's going to make it seem like you've got shortages when in fact it's just scanned the wrong label. Amazon's got some suggestions about reducing vendor lead time. There's probably a whole nother webinar that we could dedicate just to that topic alone. But more details on that probably a little bit further down the road, and or something that you're more than welcome to ask and get some more details from me about. And then last but not least, labeling and delivery compliance. That is crucial. That's got its own handbook itself that Amazon provides that you could use for surely some light bedtime reading. But I'd highly encourage that if you're part of that Amazon team, that you're familiar with their labeling and compliance requirements for delivery. And then just right about on time here, we're back for some Q&A. Saw some questions come up, so hopefully we've got some for me in the chat.
Yeah, I'm actually only seeing one question. So we have a question on Amazon's training for shortages on Vendor Central says to wait up to 35 days after the invoice due date before the supplier should raise a dispute. But here it seems like Supply Pike is suggesting that we dispute before that 35 days. Is that correct?
Yeah, so I'd say that is a question that I honestly hear quite regularly, is that kind of getting a little bit of conflicting information here. So while I would say that in general, waiting for Smart Match to happen initially, so there is kind of this sweet spot in the timing where it's a little bit too early or where it's a little bit too late. Kind of my take on this and why we're recommending the timing essentially within that period of time, from my perspective, is that we're essentially providing as additional information in that dispute that's going to help aid Amazon in that matching process. So essentially, whenever you're going in and you're saying this ASIN, we shipped you this many units with this external ID, this is hopefully helping, again, Amazon's own internal matching system find the inventory that's missing. So I think from my perspective, even though we want to wait, so essentially submitting the dispute while it's still like a potential shortage, for example, can cause more work or more churn that's necessary. But I feel like when we're getting it right within the timing, we're actually helping them to identify and find that inventory, as opposed to doing something where we're doing unnecessary work, if you will. So it's a little bit of a sweet spot. Not necessarily what I would say is conflicting with Amazon's guidance. I think really what they're recommending and suggesting here is don't dispute while it's still potential. Like, give them a chance to actually try and receive your inventory before we go and dispute them. So that's my take on it, and I hope that helps answer your question about that.
That's helpful. We actually do have another question kind of in the same line. So if the
Sure.
smart matching is the same time as the optimal dispute window, should we wait for the smart matching first before disputing? It seems like you maybe answered that one, but would you mind reiterating?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I'm just gonna again kind of reiterate my past statement there. Based on our assessment or the testing that we've done in order to make these assumptions, we're recommending that we dispute within that 40 days in time. So it's kind of coinciding more with the smart match, less so than jumping the gun, if you will. So I think, again, trying to decipher what Amazon is intending is a bit of a challenge. And I say that having worked on the inside a few years myself. So the way that I would interpret it, again, is what they're trying to say is don't dispute it while it's still potential. Like, wait for it to actually get received before we do it and contest it. And I think that also has to do with some of the downstream when we're talking about accounting on the actual supplier or vendor side, where again, if we're filing disputes too early, for example, there's multiple pays and deducts that are happening. That can just be a challenge from how you guys are doing reconciliation for accounting, for example. So I think it's just trying to maximize the efficiency of like when you're doing the work. Is it too much work? So I think again, that's my perspective on the timing piece. And I think again, the data that we've got supports that.
That's very helpful. Okay, I'm not seeing any more questions. Please feel free to throw it in the chat, but while we're waiting for you guys to submit stuff, we can go ahead and move on to the demo portion of today. If you wouldn't mind clicking, I think there's a couple other slides that I can talk through
Yeah,
before.
we've got some more resources to share.
Yeah, so you guys will get a copy of this deck. So you'll have these links, but we have a link to our YouTube channel. If you guys haven't checked those out, please go and subscribe. This is definitely a kind of a passion project of the team, is trying to get our YouTube channel up and running. So would love to see you guys subscribe to that. We also do have an Amazon Deductions Explained ebook. I will send that in the chat for anyone who hasn't been able to check that out. If you guys are a Walmart supplier as well as an Amazon supplier, we do also have a resource of how Walmart has discontinued their settlement disputing. So that's just it's been some big news that has happened over the past year, and kind of what that means for suppliers. But I will send that Amazon Deductions Explained ebook so you guys can check that out. Please check out our YouTube channel. It would make us very happy. And yeah, I think now we can jump into the demo if you're ready, Sean. And
Yeah,
if
let
you
me
have any additional questions, please feel free to throw them in the chat.
just switch over my screens here, and then we can run through the demo as well.
Perfect. I'm just pulling up the Amazon ebook, which is right here. So check that out if you want a list of all of the Amazon codes and how to fight them. Perfect. Okay, you want to tell us about how SupplyPike can help
Yeah,
suppliers?
absolutely. So as I've got on my screen now is the supply bike application specifically for Amazon. The way that I like to describe this is to say that this is going to be a one-stop shop user experience that is going to eliminate need or kind of some of the redundancy of using Vendor Central so much. I'm slightly biased, but having used Vendor Central for so long, this is a refreshing user experience that I can only recommend. As far as how we navigate across here, we've got multiple different tabs. We're going to start here on the dashboard. This is dashboard, but it's going to give you a high-level view into some key performance indicators that could be driving your deduction management health. So some of the key things that we like to observe are the impact of deductions to your business, how long it's taking on average for your team to dispute, how many of these deductions have been cleared or are still open and outstanding, for example. Once we've got our automated disputes firing, this is how we can track and measure what the automations are doing on your behalf. But in general, outside of just tracking and a quick snapshot for you, for really anybody on your team, from the CFO down to the person managing deductions, just to get a better look and feel about how things are going, this is going to really help your team communicate seamlessly across teams, as well as better understand in very granular detail like what's actually happening, and just eliminating the need for your team to be pulling reports, data from Vendor Central, pivoting tables in Excel endlessly. We've got everything you could possibly want and need at a detailed view, both from current action status from any of your deductions, including what I was mentioning earlier about that optimal time period for Amazon. We do parse and split that out. So again, you've got visibility into when disputes are in that optimal time period, and you can submit those quickly and easily and track and measure the success of those as well. We're going to be tracking deductions by status, which is important. One of the interesting things that we're able to additionally track is when an item is in settlement. If you create an open statement case through the SupplyPike application, you'll have direct line of sight into where it is in that process, including once it's been settled, which is a fantastic feature. We've also got real high level way for you to better understand when Amazon's taking deductions, what does that actually comprise of? So has payment on invoices from July happened because of just invoice payments or normal payment at due date? Was it recovered due to a dispute, settlement, or was it something that got paid out in that smart match process? We've got the ability to parse that out and for your team to better understand if you're getting a payment or deduction, what is it actually from and for? Tying that back on an invoice level directly to the month that you submitted that. And then we get more granular and detailed as we go down, again, for you to better slice and dice and understand what's actually driving your deductions. What's the trend of these over time? Is it driving in the right direction? What are some of these top driving occurring ASINs so that you can kickstart that root cause analysis process, or just better understanding the split between the different types of claims that we're able to track and monitor. So this is just the dashboard. It gets more detailed and awesome from here, if you can believe that. And it includes the deductions tab, where this is what I would consider more of the action center. So the actionability piece of the SupplyPike application, we're sitting directly on top of your vendor central account. So instead of having to go into dispute management to dispute all of your claims, for example, this is something that you can do just directly through the SupplyPike application. So we're giving you just a ton of detailed views about what's actionable, in progress, that's been denied and is still open, and allowing you from this page, for example, to submit open statement cases directly. But again, we've got detailed view about every single claim. So again, everything is super granular, detailed, saving your team an immense amount of time from compiling all of this information just to understand where is this dispute at, whether that's in the timeliness window, whether that's in its repayment, or the specifics about each deduction. So that pesky invoice hierarchy that Amazon creates, we're able to track that end to end so that you can understand if there's been a deduction and a payment, what is actually truly outstanding, including the payment number and details for you to track and do the reconciliation. One-click disputing, made super easy by attaching proof documentation as well. So again, our recommendation, if you've got that, we can directly link into, grab that evidence and attach it for you. So really all you have to do is just go in, one-click submit to dispute. From here, this is our latest feature. This is co-ops. This is another type of revenue loss on Amazon. We didn't really talk too much in detail about today, but similar to what we're doing with others, we're allowing you to come in here, view each specific co-op deduction, what's been taken. The key piece here is that we're also performing a validity check or an assessment to determine, based on the terms of your agreement with Amazon, was this deduction taken correctly or was it taken in error, allowing you to sort and filter pretty quick and easily if something was deemed invalid, so that you can go in, understand the specific reasoning behind our assessment, and then again, quick and easy, one-click submitting to dispute. Last but not least, before we wrap up for today, I will say again, we sit on top of your vendor central account. And those of you who've been in the weeds using vendor central know that the case log can be a little bit finicky, and it can be tough just in general to sift through all of the cases to find what you're needing. So we attach directly to that. We give you a number of different options to submit contact us cases directly to vendor central to our application, which includes that open statement settlement. So we've got some information in a guide to help make that process in general super streamlined and easy for you to manage, all again directly through the SupplyPike application. So that is the quick and dirty I've gone through today. I think that was like 5 or 6 minute crash course. More than willing at any other point to go into detail if anybody else wants it, but just want to say thank you all again for your time and for staying tuned with me today.
Yeah, thank you everyone. It was so great to see you guys. And thank you so much, Sean. I really appreciate everything that you've shown us here today. I feel like I learned something, which is always nice. So I hope everyone has a fantastic rest of their Thursday, and hopefully we'll see you guys again soon. Bye guys.